Very old. I don't think that any of us can possibly appreciate how old we are. There are some who move closer to it than others, whose psyche is so organized or so refined and sensitive that they can feel antiquity within them. Through some mysterious way, they know where they have come from, and they feel the deep, deep past moving within them. They know that they were not created only at their birth, that they come trailing clouds from vast antiquity. And this deep, deep past is working in and through them. History is not what was, it is what is. History may be what we know of what has been and is, but we know so very, very little. And it should be preeminently clear that simply because you do not know your past does not mean that it is not working in you. It is working in you whether you know it or not. The past is influencing the present is a simple expression which anyone must be able to accept. But how deeply does it influence us? And even when you are not aware, it is moving, moving, moving. We are not even sure now of the origins of World War II. History is such a dim kind of wisdom and knowledge. Various persons go back and put pieces and bits together, and they make a mosaic out of it, and they say, that's history. That's the way they saw history as they constructed it from the little bits and pieces that they saw and chose and could manage. World War II, World War I is still being rewritten in this scientific age. We really don't know very much about it, and yet it's in a lifetime of many of us here this morning. Well, what then about the history of Greece and Rome and Egypt and the Mesopotamia? What about the Tigris and Euphrates, and how important are they to us? They formed us. They created us. They're part of us. And we know so very, very little about them. We, in our great wisdom and knowledge, don't even know World War I, and we would presume to know what Greece has done to us and what's come to us from Egypt. Or to put it in another way, our history is 5,000 years old. That's such a long time. 2,000 years in our era, that stretches so far back. And then take another 3,000 and you've got the limits of our history. What a long time. Why, it isn't more than a drop of water in a large lake. Use the old hackneyed expression, not more than a grain of sand on a big beach. 5,000 years. Cro-Magnon man was 35,000 years ago. Can you begin to let your imagination run that far? He was like us. He's the same species, same kind of brain. No changes to speak of in our bodies and brains for 35,000 years anyway. How can you go that far back? Well, then try going back 400,000 years. 400,000 to Heidelberg man. What one of my friends calls brain cannibals. They would put a hole in the brain, in the head, and suck out the brains of their brothers and sisters. That's us, you know. You don't have that happen in your past without it being part of your present. 400,000 years of history, not history, of life in the world of which we know almost nothing. That enough? Then let's take the discoveries of Leakey in Africa. And now they used to put it at a million years, and now they've got it pushed back to 2 million years and better. Us, we, developing, it's part of us. That far enough? Oh, that's just the beginning. Take 100 million years, 200 million years for the life that began to be us. It's part of us. We're not separated from it any more than we're separated from the beings that create us when we're born, or from the life that went on in her life and through her parents. That's all part of us. 200, 300 million years. It is important that we feel it some degree. I said I was tender about my capacity to make it clear. Let me read you a paragraph or two from one of those poetic, intuitive, understanding geniuses who could feel it and had the wit and the ability to say it. Thomas Mann. Very deep is the well of the past. Should we not call it bottomless? For the deeper we sound, the further down into the lower world of the past we probe and press, the more do we find that the earliest foundations of humanity, its history and culture, reveal themselves unfathomable. No matter to what hazardous lengths we let out our line, they still withdraw again and further into the depths. He goes on to add that nationally and personally, you may come to a stopping point at which you find assurance and comfort, but you must know that the depths have not actually been plumbed. Stop where it is convenient and comfortable for you and where you find assurance, but you haven't even begun to plumb the depths. You see those fears and those horrors of 400,000 years, you name it. have entered into our bone and body and blood. And we can know about them. They're part of us. And we have to see it. We have to feel it. We have to appreciate it. And so I go to another poet. That's why I put poetry in the title of this series. I don't know anybody who's done it as beautifully as this man, Nikos Kazantzakis. In his book, The Odyssey, and elsewhere, he says it over and over again in such beautiful ways. Listen to these lines. But the complex mind gazed on the new gods in silence and thought how beasts were merged and grafted with man's heart, how they had filled his belly, coiled about his loins, and how that panting mongrel breed had turned to gods. At times the beast's head smothers the dark soul of man. At times man's reverent head springs from the beast's body and fights for its salvation, filled with light and tenderness. The archer's soul throbbed, for its dim divinings here had stood in stone 1,000 years, hacked in the sun. Thus had these two great foes within him, beast and God, fought fiercely in his bosom, head, and loins, until high in his mind they turned to friends from so much strife. And forefather beast thus met with grandson God within him. May you be blessed, entangled ghosts, for now I know who cried within me and what my ultimate destination. Beast and man, 400,000 years, 1,000,000 years. Let it be very clear to us that our logical brain is the latest and last development, not the earliest, of course, the latest, the last, the logical mind. The rest of that brain was there for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. And brains store up and transmit and hand on. Our history is there in here, unknown to most of us, but not unfelt and not unimportant, not uninfluential, and not unreal. Tremendous, powerful, and it expresses itself in what we want to have termed the instincts, the thing that moves in animals to teach them, and to move them to preserve themselves, and they don't know how it comes, and they don't know what they do and why they do it, but this brain and body are hand on this knowledge and wisdom. And that knowledge and wisdom is there in us. We have lost it, overlaid it, and hidden from it. And now mostly we hide from it. But it is there. It is there for our utilization. If we have the courage to face it, and we know that we have the skills and capacities to discover it, if we have the courage to face it. This unknown past is revealed to us in many ways. It's revealed to us in symbols, which Erich Fromm calls are necessary to get that wisdom, and I don't know what term to use for it, that wisdom, that knowledge, that awareness, all in quotes, to get that past our censor, because we don't want to know it. We're afraid of it. It's too devastating. Even for most of us here in this congregation this morning, we will not face it. Not I. And very few of you, very few anywhere. That's the significance of dreams. They come to us in symbols so that we can think about them without facing them. And we know now enough about dreams, even though they really have just become scientifically observable in the past few years. Scientifically observable. What am I saying? Ancient people knew that there was a wisdom in dreams. And you find them interpreted and analyzed and stated in the Bible. There are primitive groups that make a custom every day of analyzing their dreams. They knew that things came to them in dreams. Where'd they come from? That conscious mind? No, the conscious mind is unaware of them. Some of us, like myself, who can't stand to face them perhaps, can't even remember our dreams in the morning. If they start to intrude, we slip them by. Even though they've come to us in the lovely language of poetry and myth and fairy tale. Same kind of symbols. But we can take those symbols and just laugh at them and chuckle about them and talk about them. Never understand them. How the mind works to cover up and to hide. But you can learn to understand your dreams. They're one of the ways in which you can reach back into that past, into that personal past of yours, or into that deep, deep racial past of all of us. Dreams are only one way. Psychoanalysis is another. We know that psychoanalytically you can take some people back into the womb. Certainly back to the earliest days. Not I. Can't take me back. Could, perhaps, if I'd expose myself. I don't know what happened then. Neither do most of you, but it's there in you. And through your dreams or through psychoanalysis, you can have it revealed. A past that moves you, drives you, controls you, and we don't even know about it. But the access is there. And even if you don't want to know about it, can't stand it, you'd better understand that it's there. Or mandalas, you know the mandala forms. You see them in exotic books now and then. The various forms and symbols and structures that people just draw unconsciously or consciously. And those mandalas, those symbols are familiar the whole wide world over. I'm talking now about a universal language, the language of symbol, the symbolic language that hides from the conscious mind the things that it really knows. Mandalas are knowable by anyone in the world, whether they come from an American Indian or from somebody in India or Egypt or Denmark. The language is universal, known. This is why Fromm calls it a forgotten language, and one book by that same title, The Forgotten Language. Once we knew it, now we've lost it. We have deliberately lost it and forgotten it. But anyone who wants to can pick it up and read it. You know about child drawings? They've been analyzed lately, and children all over the world do the same thing in their drawings. All over the world. Is that accidental? They didn't learn from each other. They're pulling out of a deep past as children, something that was common to all of us and is common. And as we grow older, of course, we lose that capacity because we cover up from the first day on. You know about poetic insights. I gave you that thing from Kazantzakis. You could find them almost anywhere, these poets who know. Let me just run over 2 or 3 definitions of poetry. You won't remember them, but you'll get the impact of them. Poetry essentially is not just putting words that rhyme together, you see. It's not making something nice, not making a motto that you can put on your desk. It's expressing those things out of the intuitions and if you allow me the term, the instincts. Says Carl Jung, poetry is the echo of the primitive through our veil of words. What a beautiful description. The echo of the primitive. T.S. Eliot says, poetry is making words after speech reach into silence. Amy Lowell says, I meet poems where they touch my consciousness, and that is already well along on the road of evolution. Well along by the time it gets to her consciousness where she meets it. Maybe she's just a mystic talking, but I could confirm this and dozens of times over. D.H. Lawrence says the same thing in another way. He says, theorize all you like, but when you start to compose, shut your theoretic eyes and go for it with instinct and intuition. Well, I've talked about dreams, psychoanalysis, mandalas, child drawings, poetic insights, and then I add, of course, fairy tales and myths, with which this series will mostly be concerned. These fairy tales are also universal. They are perpetuated from one unconsciousness to another in words that are beautifully used to veil the instincts and the intuitions and the wisdom to get by the censor. You can read them as simple stories as you read poetry to get words rhyming with each other, but you miss them if that's all you get. They don't last for centuries and go on for myriads of children wanting to hear them over and over and over again unless there's something basic in there that comes from further back than that child's days on earth or that child's experience. I want to talk now a word on myths, and next week I shall talk to you on fairy tales. Myths are very old, and they are a very common universal language. They deal with common forms, common subjects, and a common language. Myths like mandalas are familiar, readable, knowable, understandable by anyone, anywhere in the world, regardless of their immediate past cultural history or their current activities, who has the wit to understand himself and to probe into what moves in him below his awareness. Any myth, anywhere in the world, is understandable. They have the same language and they're talking about the same thing. Whether that myth is Hebraic or Chinese. Listen to this description of myth by Joseph Campbell, who is what, by all odds, the most experienced and knowledgeable in this subject, I think, certainly in this country and maybe in the world. Myth is the dramatic representation of our deepest instinctual life. Say it again. Myth is the dramatic representation of our deepest instinctual life, of a primary awareness of man in the universe. A primary awareness of man in the universe. Listen to this description from another person. Myth is a formula into which life flows as it realizes its traits out of the unconscious. Listen to this from Joseph Campbell again. Every people has received its own seal and sign of superior designation, communicated to its heroes and daily proved in the lives and experiences of its folk. And though many who bow with closed eyes in the sanctuaries of their own tradition, like us here in this church, rationally scrutinize and disqualify the sacraments of others, an honest comparison immediately reveals that all have been built from the one fund of mythological motifs, variously selected, organized, interpreted, and ritualized according to local need, but revered by every people on earth. We have a common history. We have a common physiology. We have common problems. We have a common language, the language of symbol that speaks of this common ancestry and heritage and history in ways that allow you, if you wish, I keep repeating, to avoid, but which, if you wish, will open up to you the unplumbed and unknown mysteries of the past. What are these common subjects? We'll be dealing with some of them in the course of this series. They're what Jung and others call the archetypes. And this is a realm that we're just beginning to move on. So little work done in this area by any scholars anywhere. One of the reasons for my timidity in approaching it. But these archetypes are there within us, these images. They're lower than the archetypal ideas. There are images in there which are common to all of us and which every people in the world has in some way or other tried to express and to describe. These are some of those, and these are perhaps the main ones. Stories of birth and origin, expressing these archetypes which lie behind the story. The story is a way of trying to describe when you don't know how to describe and when your scientific knowledge is inadequate to what you, quote, know in your feelings and intuitions. Stories of birth, of rebirth, death, of the loss of paradise. Every people in the world with stories on the loss of paradise. Conflict with the deities, universal. The unconscious. Every single people in the world have dealt with the unconscious. You know what they've called it? Of course, they've called it the underworld. What better term could anyone invent than that, the underworld? And what a modern fairy story teller calls the place of the wild things. Think of that, poetry in a modern American fairy tale teller. He calls it the place of the wild things. Slaying the monsters, heroes, always everywhere, finding the right way, finding the path, scapegoats, natural catastrophes, The flood is known everywhere, all around the world, and fires, famines, sibling rivalry, no group without it. And wait till we get to those fairy tales. Right away, you know, the sibling rivalry in the fairy tales. They're dealing with things from that deep past that Thomas Mann was talking about, that sibling rivalry. And then you get into incest everywhere in the world. Father murderers, mother murderers, children murderers, mother seekers, father seekers, cannibalism. I talked to you about the brain cannibals. Cannibalism through how many hundreds of thousands of those years? Male, female dominance, the youngest child, these are a few. Joseph Campbell says that the function of myths are these: to explain the universe. You don't know how to do it scientifically, but somehow or other you know. So you develop a story like the one that I read to you this morning from Genesis that explains the universe. And if you're a human being, even the most primitive, you want to know what's around you and how it came to be, and you'll describe it somehow. And all over the world, they described it in their own poetic ways and essentially in the same way. Your myths help to hold people together. They give you a sense of belonging, and so we have our little mythologies in this church, our little rituals, and our mythology should be much stronger so that we be more of a people. But every people, including the Christian religion and all the other religions, have used their myths to hold the people together, and then, of course, to give comfort and courage, because you can't live without it. And so we tell stories of the past so that you'll know that it was managed by your fathers, and it can be managed by you. And in the telling of the story together in a church or around a campfire, we remind each other that we are here to help. And we've got all our fathers there to help with us. And then fourthly, he says myths are for the handling of guilt. And this I won't get to until the end of my series, because I think it's probably the most difficult and dangerous of all the concepts, and the most important perhaps of use of all the myths, to handle our guilts, because guilt is a universal thing. We didn't invent it. We didn't invent it purposely. It wasn't something we wanted, and it's universal. And it wouldn't go on from generation to generation unless there was some really fundamental, basic origin for it that lay beyond all conscious life. At least that seems to me reasonable. So you see, essentially, myth describes poetically what we know subconsciously, or intuitively, or instinctively. And myth describes that in a way that enables us to avoid it if we wish to. Ultimately, it seems to me that the scientific description can replace myths, for we can understand scientifically what we have all these thousands of years only intuited or felt. We now have, I think, the techniques with which to explore, and anything that's stated mythologically can be stated factually and scientifically. But I believe as well that the poetic form of knowing, and understanding is immensely persuasive and artistically and emotionally valuable. Develop our science as we will and can and must. I still do not believe that we would want to dispense with our poetry and our mythology.